Hey, what's up guys? Joker here. Today we're going to be doing a PC performance review for Resident Evil 7 Biohazard, which is available at the time of me making this video. If you guys want to pick it up over on CD Keys where I got it, I paid 35 bucks over there, so you can save yourself about $25 if you want to go over there and pick it up. I will leave a link down in the description below. But we're going to be going through, all the graphics options and testing on the likes of the GTX 1080 to 1060 and the RX 480, just like we always do in these performance review and touching on the averages and the minimums. And we will start off by going over the graphics options in just a moment. Just to let you know, we were running on the i7 6800K here in my main system with 32 gigabytes of RAM. The GTX 1080 was running at its stock settings just with the power limit increased, but the GTX 1060 and the RX 480 were both overclocked. So I had the 1060 with an additional 200 on the core and 300 on the memory, while the RX 480 was bumped up to 1400 megahertz and 2150 on the memory. So now getting into the options menu, you can see that I am running at 1440p, and we do have 144 Hz support in here. I'm just running at 120 because I happen to be on my RX 480 at the moment. On the display mode, we do have full screen borderless windowed as well as windowed modes, and for the FOV, it goes in degrees, so you can go from 70 all the way up to 90. Not a massive range there, but it is what it is. You've got a little bit of an FOV option there. The frame rate you could put to variable, 60 or 30. Variable basically uncaps the frame rate entirely, and I've got VSync running off, and I'm using the normal rendering method, although you could put it on interlaced. I imagine if you were running something like a 1080i display, then that's probably something you'd want to use. The resolution scaling goes from half all the way up to 2 times, and I did do some testing with the GTX 1080 at 1.2 because I found that since I had the ample horsepower of the GTX 1080, gave me a nice boost in the visual fidelity at 1440p to give me some more crisp edges on some things, because the anti-aliasing in this game is not amazing. One of the things that kind of holds it back, but thankfully the gameplay is actually top-notch. I'm really enjoying Resident Evil 7 so far. Everything else in here you could see I do have, I'm going to put that back to 1 times for now. Everything else in here I do have completely maxed up in here. For the anti-aliasing, they've got SMAA, which is what I was using. They've also got FXAA, TAA, and FXAA with TAA, but like I said, I was using SMAA throughout all of my testing. I did have motion blur off. This was on high. This is the highest that all of these go. Depth of field is another one that I opted to turn off. But everything else in here, you can see I do have cranked all the way up or turned on, whatever I could put on anyway. But at 1440p on the RX 480 and the GTX 1060, I did opt to lower the ambient occlusion down to SSAO, and I also put the shadows down as well. If I could find the shadow quality, there we go. I put it down to just high. So, but just by lowering that, I found myself get a nice boost in performance, and it also lowered the VRAM requirement on the game quite a bit, because I was seeing even at 1080p on the GTX 1060, it was maxing out my VRAM at 6 gigs, and on the GTX 1080, I saw it regularly over 7 gigabytes in some of the areas of the game, so very, very VRAM taxing on this game. But just by dropping that shadow quality down to high and the ambient occlusion to SSAO, I saw myself save about 1 to 1.5 gigabytes of VRAM when I dropped it down to that. Even at 1440p, with the 1060 and the RX 480, I was actually using less VRAM than at 1080p, because at 1080 I was testing at max settings. So definitely some options you can get in there and tweak if you are struggling with the VRAM requirements of this game. So the game is certainly scalable as far as the options are concerned. But we're going to go ahead and jump in and take a look now at the performance numbers that we got, starting off with the GTX 1080 with 1080p and 1440p. This is just the max settings. We saw an average of 139 and a minimum of 111 on at 1080p, while at 1440p we saw an average of 93 and a minimum of 81. So the GTX 1080 is certainly capable of powering this game completely maxed out. No questions asked, which is why I had the ample headroom there in performance, which is why I put on some scaling, and I tested at 1440p with 1.2 times scaling, which I found gave me really crisp edges. I thought it made the textures kind of look a lot more sharp, and just made the game look better overall. So that's what I'm going to be using in my personal gameplay when I'm playing the game, and with that I got an average of 72 FPS and a minimum of 56, which is really just this one part where I had like dropped down into the cellar, and I believe it was like kind of like loading in, so it had dropped down to 56 there. But this was testing at stock settings on the 1080, so I could certainly go ahead and throw on my overclock very easily and probably bring up that average and minimum just a bit. But even at 1.2 times scaling, it's very capable of powering it at 1440p from walking around in the game playing on that. With the GTX 1060 and the RX 480 at 1080p, we could see the GTX 1060 pulling in an average of 83 FPS and a minimum of 61, while the RX 480 pulled in an average of 105 and a minimum of 87. So AMD Radeon pulling in a very commanding lead over the GTX 1060 here, which I'm really kind of chalking up to the video memory, where the GTX 1060 is probably being limited by its 6 gigabytes versus the RX 480 with its 8 gigabytes. Both teams have now had time to get out their game day release drivers. The AMD had beat them out by a few days, releasing, I believe it was on Friday or Thursday. I can't remember exactly which day it was. They put out their game release drivers, and then on launch day, Nvidia got their game ready drivers out with 378.49. But AMD still pulling in a very commanding lead here, probably because they got that 8 gigabytes of VRAM there. But switching over to 1440p now, where remember we were testing with SSAO and also with the shadows at high. Once again, the RX 480 wins here with an average of 80 FPS and a minimum of 68, while the 1060 had an average of 68 and a minimum of 58. At the end of the day, though, both of these cards are capable of powering this game at 1080 and 1440p with nearly the highest details, even at 1440p there. The cards are overclocked, like I said, and everything like that, but, the VRAM is probably helping out the RX 480 out there, but if you're out there running either of these cards, you shouldn't have any concerns whether or not you could run this game. And if you're running something less than this, maybe if you're out there running a GTX, like 970 or something like that, you should be able to go ahead and tweak some of those options, because as I mentioned, just lowering down the shadows and ambient occlusion saved us almost 1.5 gigabytes of VRAM there, and even kept us down below 5 gigabytes at most of the time at 1440p. So that's going to help out a lot of you out there. Just lowering down a couple of options like that will give you much better performance on this title. But I have really no issues recommending this to you based on what I've played so far. I'm really enjoying the campaign, the story, the gameplay, the combat. Everything feels really good. The audio is extremely atmospheric, and with the optimization being as good as it is, I'm really happy to see a return to form for the Resident Evil franchise. Shaking it up and going the first-person route isn't something I had really expected to enjoy with that, but yeah, I'm having a blast at playing this game. So if you want to pick it up and save a few bucks, you can pick it up over on CD Keys. I'll leave a link down in the description below to that, which does help to support the channel. And I'll catch you guys next time. Ta-ra.